Alright, let's dive into something that's been on my mind lately: civility in sports and media. And who better to spark this conversation than Sam Acho, former NFL player turned ESPN analyst. Now, I've been following his recent comments, and what strikes me is how he's not just talking about sports, he's using sports as a lens to talk about something much bigger: civility in society. Personally, I think this is where the conversation gets really interesting. It's not just about athletes behaving on the field, it's about how their behavior, their platforms, and their voices can shape broader cultural norms. Here's the thing: Sam Acho isn't just saying, "Be nice." He's drawing parallels between sports and politics, and it's a perspective that's both refreshing and thought-provoking. In my opinion, what makes this really stand out is his take on disagreement. He says, you don't always have to be on the same page, whether you're talking about a 3-4 defense or a political policy. The goal, he argues, is the same: to win the game or to serve the country. But here's where it gets tricky, and fascinating. What many people don't realize is that disagreement, when handled with respect, can actually strengthen a team or a society. It's not about avoiding conflict, it's about navigating it with integrity. Now, let's talk about the locker room. Acho mentions that political conversations weren't off-limits in the NFL. They debated everything from track versus golf to Colin Kaepernick's kneeling protests. And yes, sometimes those conversations got heated. But here's the key: they didn't walk away. They didn't drop the ball and leave. They kept showing up, to practice, to meetings, to lunch. If you take a step back and think about it, this is a microcosm of how society should function. Disagreements happen, but the relationships endure because there's a shared goal. This raises a deeper question: why can't we replicate this in our broader political and social discourse? One thing that immediately stands out is Acho's emphasis on the platform athletes have. He's not just talking about speaking up, he's talking about stewarding that platform responsibly. A detail I find fascinating is his mention of intellectual capital. Athletes, he says, are more than just what they do on the field. They're thinkers, educators, and influencers. But here's where it gets complicated: using that platform comes with risk. People might disagree, backlash might follow, but Acho's point is that the risk is worth it. What this really suggests is that silence often does more harm than speaking up, even if it's messy. Now, let's bring Sophie Cunningham into the mix. Acho doesn't dive deep into her specific actions, but his broader point about athletes using their platforms applies here. Personally, I think Cunningham's activism in the WNBA is a prime example of what Acho's talking about. She's not just playing basketball, she's using her voice to advocate for what she believes in. And while not everyone agrees with her, that's kind of the point. From my perspective, this is what civility looks like in action: not avoiding controversy, but engaging with it thoughtfully. Finally, let's talk about sports media. Acho calls out figures like Pat McAfee, who have massive platforms. What many people don't realize is that these platforms aren't just about entertainment, they're about influence. Acho's critique of the Texas vs. Georgia game is a perfect example. Fans threw bottles onto the field to protest a bad call, and while the referees reversed the decision, Acho asks, what did they really win? This isn't just about sportsmanship, it's about accountability. If you take a step back and think about it, this is a metaphor for how we handle mistakes and disagreements in society. Do we throw metaphorical bottles, or do we acknowledge when we're out of bounds? So, here's my closing thought: Sam Acho's commentary isn't just about sports or media, it's about the kind of society we want to build. Personally, I think his call for civility, rooted in accountability, respect, and the willingness to engage, is something we all need to hear. What this really suggests is that whether you're an athlete, a politician, or just someone scrolling through social media, you have a platform. The question is, how are you stewarding it? And that, my friends, is a question worth pondering.